Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping in to a couple of Imperial Stouts. These are just standard Imperial Stouts, no barrel aging, so they're going to be all about the characteristics brought by the malt bill and any other unique additives, but no barrels. So for today's beers, we're going to be starting with a brewer that I've heard a lot about. I've not had any beers by them yet. This is my very first, so I'm really excited about that. This first one is by Jester King. It's called Black Metal, and it is a Farmhouse Imperial Stout. They're based in Austin, Texas. This one clocks in at 10.4% ABV. Moving on to number 2, this is Adroit Theory. This one's called Black as Your Soul. Also an Imperial Stout, 10% ABV on this one. And Adroit Theory is based in Purcellville, Virginia, though this one was done at their Vent Hill, Virginia facility. So we're looking at 2 non-barrel aged but very nice sized bottles here of some classic Imperial Stouts, both very close in ABV, 10.4 versus 10%. One I know very well produces great beers. One I've never had anything, but I have heard good things, so I'm excited to jump in. So without further ado, we're going to get started with Jester King's Black Metal, the farmhouse style Imperial Stout that clocks in at 10.4% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's Imperial Stout review, we have got Jester King out of Austin, Texas. This is called Black Metal. It is a farmhouse style Imperial Stout, clocks in at 10.4% ABV. So first thing first, as you might have caught here, Black Metal, and it's got a black and white and actually kind of silver label on it. And your eyes are not deceiving you, that does indeed look like a member of the band Kiss on the label. So Black Metal, I see where they're going with it. I'm not suggesting that it is, but that's what it looks like, at least to me. So next thing you might be thinking is Farmhouse Imperial Stout. Well, I know what a Farmhouse Ale is, I know what an Imperial Stout is, but I've never heard of Farmhouse Imperial Stout. Well, Jester King, insofar as I understand, is perhaps the only, if not one of the only brewers that's doing this, and they release a type of beer like this every year. It is exactly what it sounds like. So a farmhouse ale is an ale produced much like a Belgian Lambic. There's wild yeast strains in the local area, that get on the malts and left out in the wild, leave the vats open. All these wild yeast strains come in and contribute their own natural funk and other underlying. It could be tart, it could be sour, it could be funky, but that's the typical kind of shtick for a farmhouse ale. So they're brewing an Imperial Stout, so a lot of dark malts and a ton volume, but they're also letting the wild yeast in their natural biome into the beer, so it is indeed a hybrid. It's a farmhouse style Imperial Stout. It's exactly what it sounds like. So let's go ahead and get this bad boy cracked. The label on the top is kind of cool. It's got this crazy looking, maniacal looking face. I don't know if you can see that, but trust me, it looks pretty neat. So I'm going to get this bad boy cracked gently. Ooh, quite effervescent. All right. I'm guessing it will be based on the incredible amount of volume that came out when I cracked that cap. So let's get this poured right in the glass. Very dark, absolutely pitch black, and yeah, that's got a good bit of carbonation in it. I thought that it might. I'm actually going to have to back off my pour here. That's just going to go crazy. Oh yeah, that is crazy active in terms of effervescence. So visually, absolutely, it's pitch black. It's pitch black. There's not a hint of light getting through this. In terms of the carbonation, I know you can't see it. It's very active, obviously, but it's super tight. It's super fine. I can see it sticking all over the inside of the glass. Obviously, it's so dark I can't see it rushing up, but we can judge by looking at this head. It's very active. In fact, while this head is quite large right now, the sheer activity with which the carbonation is rushing up is probably going to make this head collapse mostly reasonably quickly. It might have a little pad floating on top, but I don't expect this head to hold super tight like you would see on, say, a Guinness poured at a bar or something off of a nitro tap. But it did form a nice head to be certain. So I'm going to slow down my pour so we can get a little more actual beer volume and liquid into this, and just let the head settle and do its own thing. I don't have to get this right to the top. It's okay. We've got plenty of beer with which to work. So yeah, visually pitch black, head formed beautifully. Let's give it a sniff. Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah, this is a very interesting aroma on a stout. It's kind of what I expected. Farmhouse Imperial Stout. So the first thing that you get is actually what smells like classic farmhouse ale kind of aromas. It's maybe a little funky, maybe a little tart, maybe a little sour. It's definitely wild yeast in there. And then underneath that is this massively rich, heavily roasted malt bill that you'd expect from an Imperial Stout. And I can tell you, I can make a clear separation of the two. There's the farmhouse style element and there's the stout element. So the farmhouse is exactly what you'd expect. The stout is, well, you know, they're all a little bit different. This one's very intensely roasty. I'm picking up just a ton of roast, maybe almost like cherries. And it could be that elements of that malt bill are mixing with the farmhouse bill and that's what's coming through. But like ripened cherries. So there is kind of this fruity side to it. And then this dark side. So it almost reminds me of like cocoa cherries as well. A little bit of coffee, a little bit of dark chocolate, and a lot of roast. So it's kind of got this interesting dual personality here. You've got this farmhouse side and then this Imperial Stout side. So let's just jump right in and see how these two mix. Had to settle down, but it's still holding true. So let's jump in. Oh, wow. Big beer. Very complex beer. There's a ton happening all over the palate at first sip. There is just a ton for your brain to process. So first thing I got was the farmhouse side. I'm getting a lot of sour, a lot of tart, just a little bit of funk, but it's not like, gym sock or dirty towels. It's more akin to like, an actual barnyard. So I'm getting like these slight kind of hay and musty notes, as well as some sour and some tart. And that's up front. And there's also immediately behind that, a lot of these fruity accents. It almost tastes vinous to me. There's a little grape quality to it. What I picked up on the nose is cherries. Really, in the flavor is translating more to like grapes, like you'd expect in a wine. Behind that though, 100% a very rich, dark, bold, classically roasted stout malt bill here. So tons of rich roastness. There's a little bit of smokiness, but it's not Rauch beer smokiness. It's really more on the side of like a deeply roasted coffee cherry, coffee bean side. And you're getting a lot of that earthiness, a lot of that smokiness, that richness and depth of flavor coming from that end. There's a little bit of subtle chocolate, but mostly it's very earthy and deep, rich, roasted with a slight bit of smoke. So a very big palette here in terms of what's happening with flavors all over the place. And let me tell you, they mix exceptionally well. Just this intensity of the farmhouse paired with the intensity of the malt on this Imperial Stout. That's a really nice match, one I never would have thought of, but it absolutely works in this beer. Jump in for another sip. Body on this one's medium heavy. Maybe not quite as heavy as I'd expect, but it's got good breadth to it. It's not off the mark by much, mind you. In terms of mouthfeel, there was a good bit of viscosity here. Again, maybe not quite as much as I expected, but it's got a good bit of resistance. Yet again, not off the mark. In terms of what happens when you agitate around the palate, this one in particular gets very creamy. Very thick, very creamy. It's not bubbly. It's not airy. It's bordering on silky, but it's a lot more creamy. So you can think of like a cream ale. That's what it reminds me of most in terms of just what happens when you agitate around the palate. So there's this thickness to the mouthfeel, but it's also got this creaminess, bordering on silky. In terms of kind of what happens in the flavor development on the finish side, the finish is quite long. It's not dry at all. It's wet and round to the end, and it's really lingering little just suggestions of that farmhouse, but the malt becomes more clear the longer that the finish drags out. And it's just really the intensity of the roast, just how earthy this one is, and that slight smoky suggestion, but it's really there. This is a very fine, deep roast on this malt. I don't know the exact malt that they use, but it's absolutely top-notch quality. I'm really, really enjoying the balance here too, between the farmhouse elements and the classic Imperial Stout elements. This is really kind of a yin and yang beer to me. And it's got that equivalence. You have to have the yin to balance out the yang and vice versa. And that's really kind of what this beer is reminding me of. Would they both be excellent on their own and stand alone as fantastic examples of just an Imperial Stout or just a farmhouse style ale? Yeah, 100%. Be really high up there on my list, honestly. This is just well executed beer. Just well executed beer. Very inventive. I like that they decided to try something different, took a risk, and for my money, it absolutely paid off. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, count my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's Imperial Stout review. That is Adroit Theory's Black of Your Soul that clocks in at 10% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Imperial Stout review, we have got Adroit Theory's Black as Your Soul. This is a 10% ABV Imperial Stout. This specific, as is common with Adroit Theories, if you've watched our channel or had any, you know that they always have what they call a ghost number on theirs. This is Ghost 786 specifically. Adroit Theory is based in Purcellville, Virginia, though it's worth noting that this specific one was manufactured and produced at their Vint Hill, Virginia location. So, first thing first, in terms of label art, they always have very interesting label art. This one almost looks like a Rorschach test or something like that. Got kind of an ink blotch, and as I looked at it a little deeper, it almost looks like there's birds flying around, like ravens or crows kind of flying around in the midst of the ink blotch. I'm positive that the camera is not going to pick it up from this distance, but trust me, it looks really, really neat the closer you get to it. Next thing I'm going to tell you, since Adroit Theory always does this on their beers, they give you ideas of food, cheese, and cigar pairings. So this specific one, they say coffee, cocoa crusted Angus beef strip loin. Yeah, sign me up. Cheese, Gulost Norwegian goat cheese, which sounds awesome. Excuse me, that's Gjetost, Gjetost, Norwegian goat cheese. And then cigar, they suggest Burger and Argenti in Tubar. So I'm not that big into cigars. I've had a few in my life, but if you're into cigars, there's their suggested pairing for this one. So let's go ahead and get cracked into this one and see what this one's about. All right, get this poured right in the old glass here. All right, pouring it. It doesn't pour super thick, but it is quite dark, and I can see a little bit of effervescence already starting there on the sides of the glass and on the top. Not quite as active as the one from yesterday, but it looks like it's going to do a decent job at head. Yeah, there it goes. And holding this up to the light, visually, yeah. Again, it's absolutely pitch black. Very much what you expect for an Imperial Stout. I know the camera's probably not picking this up, but there is a ton of carbonation bubbles that are catching on the side of the glass, running up for that head, and I'm sure there's some that we can't see at all rushing up from the middle. Just like on the first beer, there's super fine bubbles. And as you can see, it did indeed form a very nice head here. So let's give it a sniff. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's got a very big pungent aroma, just like the first beer. You know, that's not uncommon on an Imperial Stout, but Imperial Stouts, there's a handful of beer styles that it's kind of always interesting. You're never really sure exactly what you're going to get in terms of intensity, both of aroma and flavor, kind of the profiles they develop just because the beers tend to be so complex. This is one of them. So in terms of aroma, it's very pronounced. There's a slight sweetness to it, just a suggestion of sweetness that comes off of it. And there's almost a suggestion of barrel aging, even though if this is not a barrel-aged beer. It does give off some aromas that kind of do remind me a little bit of like a bourbon barrel aged or whiskey barrel aging. I'm getting some aromas like that. And it could just be the natural slight booziness that's coming off of this big beer mixed with the natural qualities of a deep, rich roasted malt bill. Other aromas I'm getting very strongly, molasses and Definitely a little suggestion of coffee. I'm not really picking up a ton of cocoa, though it does smell like maybe baker's chocolate. I don't want to say it smells like raw cocoa, certainly not like milk chocolate, but it's got a very kind of classic blend of different aromas, and they're quite strong. It smells quite nice. Head settled down a little bit there, but I've got this nice creamy pad floating on top, so let's jump right in and give it a sip. Oh yeah. Oh wow. That's a big beer. Big beer. Bold, pungent flavors. Oh, and that's truly delicious. Okay. There's a lot happening in terms of flavor development over those first 5-6 seconds. And it does intensify, and it's kind of holding this intensity now. And I'll walk you through kind of how it develops and what's popping out. It's really holding that intensity. I have a feeling it's going to stay nice and wet and round to the very end of this finish. There's no suggestion of dryness at all. Huge intensity of the flavors, and it's just going to slowly kind of taper off until it disappears. But it's still holding strong. Very, very intense flavor profile. So the first thing you get when you first get it in your mouth, there is a slight suggestion of sweetness. And up front, paired with that, there's a little hint of a chocolatiness. It's not more akin to baker's chocolate like I got in the aroma. It's more akin to actual sweetened chocolate. So like a dark chocolate, but not milk chocolate. So far more actual cocoa in it than there would be sugar. And it doesn't really taste chocolatey per se. It's just kind of a perception issue. And that kind of builds with that slight suggestion of sweetness up front. Mind you, it's nothing like a milk stout. And then within that first couple of seconds, you start to get that roastiness of the malt bill. And that's when the first suggestion of what I picked up on the aroma as a coffee aroma is coming through on the flavor profile. And it's a very quick rush up in intensity in those first few seconds. And it's really big, bold, roasty, earthy, bordering on smoky, malt, and coffee. That's the two big kind of flavors that just take over and consume the rest of the flavor profile. So there's a ton of subtlety in aroma, and there's actually quite a lot of complexity in the flavor profile, but the bulk of it happens on the front end in the first few seconds before that roasty edge and smoky edge and kind of coffee-like edge completely just takes over, and that is the main story of this one. That's the star of the show. That's what hits you biggest and holds out the longest. And indeed, on that very first sip I took, it's probably been close to a minute now. It's only just now finally starting to disappear. So very long finish, very big, bold flavors. I'm going to jump back in for a body and mouthfeel and see if I pick anything else up on the second sip. Yes, that slight sweetness up front. And actually on second sip, what I smelled in the aroma is a suggestion of molasses in there. Yeah, that comes through on the front. And it's got a little bit, I don't know what it actually reminds me of. It's not plums and it's not apricots, but there's definitely this slight fruitiness to it. But I can't put my finger on what it is I'm actually tasting. And again, just this massive quick rush of that earthiness, that smokiness, that rich underlying malt bill, and it really does take on a very strong coffee-like presence as well. Even though it wasn't brewed with coffee. This is just a classic Imperial Stout, done well, but it's very, very nicely presented, very, very complex indeed. In terms of body and mouthfeel, the body on this one is not super heavy at all. Overall, I would say for the style, it's maybe hovering in the medium, slightly between medium heavy range. The mouthfeel isn't super thick, but it does have a decent bit of resistance. The mouthfeel feels a lot more substantive than the body to me. I'm getting a lot more sensory kind of input from the mouthfeel than I am from the presence of the heft of the body. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's not one that I would say is super duper heavy that, you know, if you're not really big into heavy beers would be off-putting, but you like the intensity of flavors of a stout. Yeah, this one's kind of got an interesting mix. It's very, very nice. This is a classic stout. There's no tricks, no gimmicks. It's just executed very, very well. I'm going to take one more sip here for final thoughts. Yeah, it just intensifies. As is often the case with an Imperial Stout, each subsequent sip just intensifies everything that you're getting on that very first one. And it's probably residual linger, and then you refreshen it again on the palate, and then it intensifies, and then again and again. That's part of the reason I love this beer style so much. I gotta say, really, really nice. This is a no trick, no gimmick, just a well-executed classic stout in imperial form. In terms of balance, you know, stouts for me are a style all about the malt bill, and there is not a thing I would change about their malt ratios in this. It's everything I could ever possibly want in a stout, and I think, yet again, Adroit Theory has nailed it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with Jester King's Black Metal. This was a farmhouse style Imperial Stout. Clocks in at 10.4% ABV. Jester King is based in Austin, Texas. So starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was absolutely huge, and it was really quite a unique beer aroma in terms of what you normally expect from an Imperial Stout. And indeed, they nailed it in the description. It's a farmhouse Imperial Stout. So it's got those wild active yeast cultures that are also in, you know, a lot of different styles of beer, but on an Imperial Stout malt bill base. So you got both qualities intrinsically and readily apparent in the nose on this beer. 100%. So you could smell a little funk, a little sour, some fruity notes, and just a rich, deep, roasty malt bill. And absolutely huge. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste for me was the same story. Just as with the aroma, it was equal part farmhouse and equal part Imperial Stout. So very much a unique beer. One I've never seen, never had before, but I gotta say it absolutely worked. Really big, bold flavors from both sides. And I kind of describe this beer a little bit of kind of a two-face, a little yin and yang, and balanced out equally. So equal parts farmhouse and equal parts Imperial Stout, and I absolutely loved it. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this one was certainly larger than average, but not quite the breadth I expected for 10, nearly 10.5% Imperial. But it was still impressive. It gets an 8 out of 10. The mouthfeel was a similar story. It wasn't quite as resistant or viscous as I expected that it would be, but it really paired well and went in unison with the body. The mouthfeel also gets an 8 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was exceptionally long. I mean, exceptionally long. These were very, very pungent flavors that lingered long after each sip. Very wet and round all the way to the end, and the flavors well over a minute. You could still just taste both the sour and the malt bill, really deeply roasted. Just very wonderful finish on this one. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a fantastic job. If anything, I needed to back it down because it was very active. I had a feeling when I cracked it and said, yep, there's a lot of carbonation backed up in there. And it just poured great for it home. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance, as you would expect with an Imperial, it was pitch black. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, I talked about this both in terms of aroma and flavor, but in the general scheme of things, yes, this was balanced absolutely beautifully. To take a beer with two beer styles that really maybe most people would never think of putting together and then not having them vie for attention, like they both had their own voice, that's exactly how to balance a beer like this, and they absolutely nailed it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I love this one. Very unique beer, and I'm going to keep my eyes out for their releases like this. As I understand, they do this yearly. I absolutely loved it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, well, This is literally the only beer I've ever had of this style. You could categorize it both as a farmhouse ale or an imperial stout, but this is really a hybrid. And frankly, for my first ever sip of a beer like this, I thought they pretty much nailed it. I give it a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Jester King's Black Metal to a 96 out of 100. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Adroit Theory's Black as Your Soul Imperial Stout, 10% ABV, Ghost 786 specific on this one. And this was produced at their Vent Hill, Virginia location, though they are based in Purcellville, Virginia. For the aroma on this one, yet again, and I kind of expect this as a rule with Imperial Stouts. They're big, bold beers, and they have big, bold flavors and aromas, and that was true in this case. Just massive, massive amounts of roast. There were some subtleties in there as well. Both of these beers really had a lot of subtleties that you really had to pay attention to, both in terms of the aroma and the flavor, and absolute treats. This one, the aroma profile was the exact same. Just richly complex, massively pungent, gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, this was very much just a classic, well-executed Imperial Stout. No tricks, no gimmicks, nothing bizarre, just well done. Just really, really well-chosen malts in the right ratios and just pulled off masterfully. The taste on this was exactly what I expected, and I can't stress enough just how intense the flavors were. I mean, just a symphony of goodness for this Imperial. Gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this one really, I thought, fell in the average range. I was kind of surprised. It did not feel heavy at all. It did not have the anticipated breadth for a 10% Imperial Stout. It wasn't weak. I would just say overall, it really was in the average range. High end, it gets a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel. Mouthfeel on this one, on the other hand, was quite a bit more resistant. It kind of gave me what I didn't expect in the body, a little bit more in the mouthfeel. Still not quite there, but it had a lot more viscosity, a lot more resistance to it than the body had weight. It gave it an 8 out of 10. For the finish. Finish on this one, just as with the first beer, was incredibly long. Each sip lingered just a ludicrous amount of time. And it really came down just to the sheer intensity and pungency of the flavors. And they just lingered on the back of the palate long after each sip. Perfect 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did almost as good of a job as the first. It wasn't quite as crazy in terms of activity of carbonation, but it did a very, very good job. Now, the height of the head didn't stick around quite as tall, but if you saw my glass, and the whole way I sipped on this one for hours, that nice little creamy pad head of foam was floating on there pretty much all the way to the end of the beer. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, yet again, just with the first, pitch black, gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance. The balance on a standard, like nothing weird in today's very inventive craft scene, which I really love, but just getting back to basics, just executing a well-done beer style. In this case, that comes down to balance of ingredients, and I think they absolutely nailed it. No tricks, no gimmicks, but the malt bill that they did choose, they got all the right ratios in there. So every little subtlety and nuance had its own voice. Without, oh, is that chocolate? Is that coffee? No, it wasn't mishmashing. It all had its own voice and different layers of subtlety, but they just paired together beautifully. It's exactly what I crave in just a standard Imperial Stout. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Filling in the intangible, I love this one. It gets a 10 out of 10 from me. Finally, as an example of the style, this beer only lost a few points in a few categories, and they weren't categories that were really critical in the grand scheme of things about what makes this beer and beer style what it is. For me, I didn't dock any points. It gets a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Adroit Theory's Black as Your Soul to a 93 out of 100. So we're looking at a 96 and a 93, two similar beers, but completely different directions and very unique and different in their own right, and only 3 points apart. If you're a fan of Imperial Stouts, I would recommend either. If you also like farmhouse style ales, this is one to seek. This was very special, very unique. Not to say this wasn't, but this just went in a completely different direction. But a little something to suit every palate. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.